Welcome to Haftarah Beshalach. We had just begun before I hit record talking about the Sefer of Shoftim. I'm not going to review all of that now for the faithful people who sat through it the first time. I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump right in. So during this period, before the kingships begin, and after that sort of direct tie to Moshe of Yehoshua is done, there's a lot of chaos in this period.
This is much better, yeah.
Yes, amazing. Okay, sorry about that, Baruch Hashem. This is definitely better. It was written, the Sefer was written between 1300 and 500 BCE, and our exact story is dated to, and it's like kind of miraculous to me that we know a year, but to 2654, which is 1107 BCE, right? We're in 5783. And the nation was subject to the rule of these two different characters, Yavin, the king, and his evil general Sisera. And the connection to the Parsha is often considered to be the connection between Shirat Hayam, the song that Moshe sings, or Moshe leads the people in when they get to Kriyat Yam-Suf, and Shirat Devorah, which is the song that Devorah sings after they successfully overcome Sisera and Yavin in battle. And the Shirim of war, these sort of songs of thanks after the war is over, are agreed to be some of the oldest parts of Tanakh. They're have like a unique form in the Torah where there's a lot of space, white space, in between the different verses of the songs, and they're very interesting. And I started by just comparing the two. Sephardim only read the Shira of Devorah; they don't read the sort of lead up to it. But I was quite taken with the characters, especially because I feel like women get a lot less screen time in our stories. And so I decided instead we're going to leave the connection to the Parsha in sort of a concrete way behind, and look instead at these two characters. And the reason I felt a little nervous about it, because I liked the idea that we were connecting, the Azia Shir of Moshe to the Shirat Devorah. But I think that there are some interesting sort of under themes that we see in both places. And so there are some connections. And again, it's so rare that you get to see such interesting female characters, especially in the Nevi'im, that I felt like it was well worth the diversion. So I invite you to hop along on this diversion train. So Devorah is one of these characters, these leaders who's appointed by God in some way, right? Not that kings get to be elected by the people, but sort of pre-kingship. And we see Devorah at the very beginning of the Sefer as listed as Devorah HaNeviah. And the Gemara in Megillah is a little bit is interested in who gets to be called a Navi or a Neviah in Tanakh, right? It's not just anyone standing on their soapbox on the corner of a street saying that God has spoken to them. But the Bright actually teaches, Tanu Rabbanan Arba'im U'Shmona Nevi'im, there were 48 prophets, Vesheva Neviot, and 7 prophetesses, right? Female prophets, who gave Nevi'ut from Hashem to Bnei Israel. Velo pachtu, velo hotiru al mashakatu b'Torah. And that what made them special, what made them sort of get that stamp of approval as being a prophet, is that they didn't subtract or add to what is written in the Torah. Chutz mimikra Megillah, which is sort of an interesting diversion, which we're not going to take right now. So only these 48 plus 7 get to call themselves Navi. It sort of reminded me of like a certification process, right? Where like you can only call yourself like a Cutco salesman, right? Or those knife salespeople if you've taken the course. So like only these people are allowed to call themselves Navi or Neviah. And the Gemara asks later, Sheva Nevi'ut man nidhu. So presumably we could count the 48 prophets, right? Yechezkel, Yeshayahu, Shmuel, right? You could sort of go through, it'd be easy, but the Gemara is confused. They can't figure out who are the 7 prophetesses. And so the Gemara answers, Sarah, Miriam, Devorah, Chana, Abigail, Huldah, the Esther. And they carefully go through and they list why each of these women should be called a Neviah. I think that Miriam is an interesting crossover to our parsha, right? If we think of Devorah as an inheritor of the experience of Miriam, and in a lot of ways there are strong connections, right? We see that Miriam and her takes the women and leads them in a dance with the timbrels, and so too Devorah leads the song of the Shirah at the end of this week's Haftarah. So I do think there's a nice sort of tie into the parsha. But then, so they go through each one, Sarah, Miriam, and then we get to Devorah. And they say, Devorah, how do we know she was a Neviah? Dichtiv, uDevorah, Isha Neviah, Eshet Lapidot. So this is the opening verse of our Haftarah, and Devorah, the prophetess, the wife of Lapidot. And the Gemara says, "My Eshet Lapidot." What does that mean to be the wife of Lapidot? Shahita osa patilot lemikdash. So interestingly, Eshet Lapidot, I was understanding to be tied to a man, right? Who is Devorah? She's known in relation to the person that she's the husband, who's her husband. But the first answer of the Gemara has nothing to do with her husband or her family, but about what makes her a righteous person. It's because she used to make the wicks for the sanctuary, and therefore the lapidot, the flames on those wicks, were called the wife. She was called the wife of the lapidot, literally a woman of flames. So I think that's such an interesting idea, right? I don't think we don't have that really, I think, within like our Jewish experience of shuls, but it made me think of like the women who maintain all those candles in those beautiful old churches in Europe that, you see in movies, like where that, right, that someone has to like come and light all the wicks. It's so Devorah did something for the sanctuary.
Excuse me, Rabbanit Yael.
Yeah, go ahead.
Women in Poland, I know from relatives of mine who told me about their mothers and grandmothers, were involved as well as bringing candles to the shuls, and that kept the shuls alive. It kept them lit.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that that's like a modern-ish, right? Echo of Devorah. That's beautiful. I think, today, like the interesting analogy, when I was right out of college, I worked for Hillel, and there was a woman, a very wealthy woman who donated money anonymously to many Hillels to pay for their electricity bills because she felt like no one wanted to pay for that. That wasn't like a cool cause to say, right? I sent kids, abroad to Israel, or I paid for their classes or whatever. And so she said, whatever it costs, I'll write a check to the electric company at the end of the month. Maybe that's like the next step in what you're describing, Rabbi Schwartz, right? That keeping the lights on is hugely important. It saves the shul, and I love that. That's beautiful. So Devorah was perhaps the first, or at least the first mentioned by the Gemara to be a woman who did that, who kept the lights on. So that's the first answer, which I think is beautiful. V'hi yoshevet tachat tomer. And the end of that, our pasuk, or the next pasuk, is that she sits under a palm tree. This is an interesting tie into Tu B'Shvat, right, where we often eat dates. Palm trees are known to be fruits that we are compared to as Jews, as we'll see later in the piece. And so that's often, and it's a fruit of Israel, so it's often a fruit eaten on Tu B'Shvat. So I think we often read this either right before or perhaps immediately after Tu B'Shvat. And so a nice tie-in. She is known as the woman who sits under the palm tree. And so the Gemara asks here, "Mai shna tachat tomer?" Right? Why did we bother? Why did the Navi bother to write out that that's where she sat? Like, what was unique or different about her doing that? Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Avshalom mishum yichud. So this is, I would say, the first place where we have like the red flag that this is a woman, and being a woman in some way is different than being a man, because here she sat out in public. If she had her own inner office in like the city hall, people would come to her in judgment, and it would be uncomfortable for her to be secluded with a man behind closed doors. Something about this immediately put my back up, right? Like, why does the woman have to sit outside and be so transparent? Everyone should sit outside, right? Today, the Rosh Yeshiva at Maharat would not have an office without a door that was all made of windows. He just felt like it was inappropriate, right, for any reason, for any woman to ever be in his office. If the door got shut, it's not enough to have a little window. You need a whole door of windows, which I think is an amazing thing. We should all strive to be as transparent and conscientious about that as possible. But it seems like it's only because Tamar is a woman that this is something expected of her in the time of the Gemara. Okay, but at least she's thoughtful, right? Being a leader is not just speaking the word of God, but understanding the situation, being able to adapt to the situation. However, the davar acher is my favorite, right? Because the other reason, ma tamar zeh ein lo ela lev echad. Af Yisrael sheba'oto hador lo haya lahem ela lev echad la'avihen shebashamayim. The verse says, right, just as a palm tree has only one heart, which I guess is right in the center of the palm tree, the palm tree doesn't send out lots of branches, right, like an apple tree. It has one branch, sort of, and it sprouts at the top with the dates coming out at the top. So too, the Jewish people had only one heart directed to their Father in heaven. So in some way, the palm tree is like a sign that Devorah has unified the people. The people are unified in their hearts. She has inspired them to be directed to God. So far, I think, putting aside the Yichud answer for a minute, there's two things that the Gemara thinks are most important to tell us about Devorah are that she is a woman who keeps the lights on in the shul, right? She makes the petilot for the mikdash, and she is someone who inspires the nation to be a lev echad. And I think about today, right? All of a sudden, the slogan is escaping me, right? But in Israel, this idea of unity is so strong right now, right? Only together. Someone else can think of it. It'll come to me in a few minutes, right? That unifying the people, bringing them together in hard times. This is something Deborah was able to do.
Biyachad ninatzeach.
Thank you. Biyachad ninatzeach, right? It seems like the date tree would be a good symbol to put under that banner that hangs everywhere, right? Because that's like the biyachad, right? Lev echad towards Avinu Shebashamayim. And Deborah belongs under that tree. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes. Sure.
Why would they make Devorah a judge? She's a woman.
Amazing question.
For those times, that would be quite unusual.
Yes, this is a perfect question, Anna. I'm so glad you're back. You asked a question that leads us perfectly into the next set of sources.
Segue.
Because, right, the Gemara, it's interesting. The Gemara does not ask that question explicitly. It does not say, wait a second, this is unusual. Why are we doing this? Right? Because even when you look at this list, Sarah, Miriam, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, none of them hold a public office, right? Sarah is the wife of Abraham. Miriam is the sister of Moshe. Hannah, ends up in the Beit HaMikdash, but it's sort of unusual. But she doesn't hold a place of office, right? Abigail and Huldah, we could digress for a long time. Esther seems to be the other woman who holds a higher office, and there are many interesting parallels between the story of Devorah and the story of Esther, but they don't ask that question. The Ralbag, however, sorry, not the Ralbag, the Shari Kedusha asks that question. So let's skip to the Shari Kedusha for a second, because I did not include many of the sources that question why a woman could be a leader, right? There are some answers like, oh, she wasn't really a prophetess, but she taught right? She was like a political leader, and she was able to lead the people. But, of course, women can't be judges. So she couldn't be a judge. She just taught the judges. She taught them how to think, right? She was a law professor. She wasn't on the Supreme Court. And I find those difficult sources. Maybe I should have brought one. We could have grappled with it. But the Shari Kedusha, I think, asks that question, but answers it in a very soft way. Right? He says, after mentioning all the warnings of the last chapter, don't become despondent. Because in Judges 4:4, right, in our pasuk, Udvar Isha Neviah, Tana debe Eliyahu, Me'id ani ale shamayim va'aretz. Right, that Devorah being a prophet, the Midrash says that I, God, testify, ben Isha, ben Ish, ben Isha, right, that God is saying, I will put my Shechina, I will allow my Nevi'ut to go through a man or a woman, ben Goy, ben Yisrael, between a Jewish person and a non-Jewish person, ben Eved, ben Shivcha, between a servant or a male servant and presumably and a free person, hakol fima asab, each according to their actions, Ruach HaKodesh Shura Alav, that the divine spirit rests upon them, right? I think what the Shari Kedusha is saying is this seems unusual, right? We don't expect slaves, non-Jews, women, right, to be able to have the divine presence rest upon them, to become Nevi'im or Shoftim. But it's actually, right, this is a system that is Hakol Lefi Ma'asav. Everyone according to their actions, and Devorah earned it. So it's unusual, it's strange, maybe it makes us a little uncomfortable, is kind of what I hear written between the lines here. But we should know that she deserves it, right? And I think that he is building perhaps off of that idea of the making the lapidot for the mikdash, right? That she has proved her worth of having the divine Shekhinah rest upon her. So it's not a perfect answer, but it makes it seem like she's unusual. Yeah, please, Tamar.
I don't remember if I.
Yeah. No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I just wanted to ask the source, Sha'arei Kedusha. What is that source? And
Ooh, it's such a good question. I looked it up and I wrote a note. Hold on, let me pull up my notes here. Hold on. It's, one of the things that is amazing about Sefaria is that it's so easy to click around. You click on commentary and you can click on any guy and you can learn every commentary there. But then it is also easy to, they all sort of just become the same. So, oops, hold on. Here, I was in the Shari Kedusha, as you might expect, is a writer of Kabbalah. Oh, hold on, it went away. It was composed in Sfat in the 1500s, and his name, why won't you come here? It was his guide to holy living and attaining divine inspiration. It's by a rabbi named Rabbi Chaim Vital. So a Safati Kabbalist of the 1500s.
okay.
And I think that's notable. I'm glad that you asked that question, right? Because 1500s is late, right? It's far after the time of the Gemara. It's not like he's commenting directly on the Gemara at that time. And so I think we see these sort of hints that that actually it shouldn't be so remarkable. It wasn't so remarkable perhaps to the rabbis of the Gemara, and it certainly doesn't, it seems remarkable but overcomable to have such an odd vessel for divine spirit. In the 1500s in Sfat, right? Compared to the Ralbag, I'm just going to double check his date.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
I understand, like she lit the candles. Okay, that was nice. But how does that make her a good judge? She's a righteous person, yes, but I don't understand.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I actually think that there are two things happening here. Dvorah is listed as a Navi and as a Shofetet, right? So she is both a prophetess and a judge. And so some people, I think the prophet piece is what bothers them. And that's where the lighting the candles, I think, is a good credentialer, right? God chose her because she has shown herself to be worthy, someone who goes above and beyond. We don't know. We can't see her CV. We don't know why she's deserving to be a judge, but it seems like if she can be a Nevi'ah, then she could also maybe be a judge. But certainly you're right. Anna, you're making me wish that I had brought some of the sources I was less comfortable with, because that's exactly what they're grappling with, right? Is this question of, right? We say a woman can't serve on a Beit Din today. Right. So even for those who believe, and I feel very blessed that this is growing, that people believe women can serve as rabbis, right, in the function of rabbis, I still, if someone came to me and said, Rabbanit Yael, can you serve on my Beit Din when my husband, or my fiance converts to Judaism, I would still have to say no, right? There are certain things that a female rabbi cannot do that a male rabbi could do. And so you could imagine, right, the Shari Kedusha saying, okay, so she's a Nevi'ah, but is he really saying she could be a judge? That's unclear. I agree with you.
Right.
But I think the idea that at least she can cross that big threshold seems to indicate that maybe she could also be a judge. And as I said, some of the commentaries sort of square it by saying, well, she wasn't really a judge, she was a teacher of judges. But the last piece that I wanted to look at on Devorah is from the Ralbag. And the Ralbag is, I looked it up and I've already forgotten, 1300s, I think is, 1288 to 1344. He was a Talmudist, Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, and he offers two other reasons. One of them is to connect her to her husband, which is a fair read of Eshet Lapidot, right? Because that's usually what Eshet means, is the wife of. And so who is Lapidot? Ki ba'ala haya shmo Barak, right? So Barak is someone who works closely with Devorah as a co-leader. And we'll see, or you will see if you go to Shul or you read the Haftarah on Shabbat, that Barak comes to Devorah seeking help. He has to go, he's the general of the army, he has to go lead the people into battle, and he wants Devorah to come with him. He's roundly criticized in the Navi for needing a woman to go do this man's job, and Devorah says, fine, I'll go with you, but the victory will be ascribed to a woman, and that woman will be Yael, and we'll look at her in a moment, because you needed me to come with you. So there's an interesting tension, but Barak is a person of worth in the storyline. And it's not clear at all that they're spouses, right? And it's that's like a little bit sticky for the general and the prophetess or the judge to be married. But that's what is a common understanding, is that Barak and Lapidot, lightning and fire, are sort of related in concepts. And so that it's hinting at the fact that she's married to Barak. So that's one option. But the second option, I just love it so much. Pirush Eshet Lapidot, al dat Eshet Chayil, Eshet Medinot, Vehayu Lapidim Velapidot Inyan Echad. So it says that perhaps the translation of Eshet Lapidot is according to the phrasing of a woman of valor, that she was a fiery woman, and torches and Lapidot are sort of similar. And so I love this idea of Devorah being fiery, and that's what Eshet Lapidot means, is that like she brings like this spark of energy to her prophecy and to her leadership, to her judgeship, perhaps. And again, in all of these lists, Eshet only means that sort of traditional wife of in one context, meaning that I think what is one of the things that is so interesting about Devorah is that if you don't read Eshet Lapidot as the wife of some man who might be named Barak, Devorah is introduced as her own person, right? Devorah Isha Neviah Eshet Lapidot. Devorah is a woman who is a prophet, who is fiery, who does tzedakah, who brings things to the Beit HaMikdash to keep it going. She is a pious, fiery woman who does her own thing, marches to her own drummer, and at the end of the day, she's judged Lefi Ma'asav, and that's enough, and that's why God rests upon her. So I think, again, in a lot of ways, that reminds me of the story of Miriam. Right? When we read about Miriam challenging her parents in the Midrash, when we read about how Miriam leads the women in song with the timbrels, right? Miriam is her own person. She speaks her mind when she knows it. And I think very much that Devorah is an echo of that strong female character. And sometimes it makes people uncomfortable and it sort of bucks the traditional system. And all of that, I think, just makes her more interesting for being so fiery. So I'm about to leave her behind to look at Yael. Any last thoughts before we pivot? Okay. So in the story, right, Devorah is sitting under her date tree, holding court, offering judgments and also prophecies. Barak comes to her and says, listen, we have a problem. We have to go fight this battle. And Devorah goes with him. And they are going to fight Sisera. Now, this is an interesting piece of the story. It has my namesake in a way, although I'll share it maybe about my name at the end if we have time. And it talks about the end of Sisera. Some people know the story better because of its connection to Rosh Hashanah, because we learn at the end of this week's Haftarah that Sisera's mother is waiting for him, and when she learns that he has been killed in the battle, she utters 100 cries, and we blow 100 shofar blasts in an echo of Sisera's mother. I think I spoke about that one Rosh Hashanah. I find that image of Sisera's mother to be very compelling. And so sometimes that story is built there. But there is actually a question about who Yael is and what she happens to be doing in the line of Sisera, and why Sisera would even go into her tent at all. So to understand who Yael is, we have to understand who her husband is. And I apologize, maybe I did this a little out of order this morning. Sisra's is the wife of Chever Hakeni, right? Yael is Eshet Chever Hakeni. And so there's a question is, who is Chever? And so now we're going to go back into Bamidbar. We're going to back ourselves up, and we're going to touch upon the story of Yitro, which again, I think it doesn't echo directly into this week's parsha, but into next week's parsha. It sort of connects us back to Shemot, to the story of Yitro. So Moshe here is talking to Chovav, who is understood to be Tzipporah's brother, right? Vayomer Moshe leChavav ben Reuel. We traditionally understand Reuel to be Yitro, Reuel Hamidiani, Choten Moshe. So Yitro, to remind us, or a peek into next week, right? Yitro counsels Moshe on how to run right, to appoint judges and shoftim, an interesting maybe connection to this week's parsha, right? So that he doesn't have to be tired by answering all the questions. But then Yitro decides to go his own way. He goes back to Midian, and Moshe asks his brother-in-law, Chovav, to come with Bnei Israel, to accompany Bnei Israel. And what he says, interestingly, right, is come with us. V'hetavnu lecha ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael. Come with us, and we will be generous with you, for Hashem has promised to be generous with Israel. Right? Basically, we'll share. And at first, Chovav says, "No, I'm not sure I want to come." But in the end, Moshe repeats this sort of promise of Yitav Hashem imanu, and Chovav capitulates. So we understand from the Sifrei of Devarim that what does it mean, come with us and we will be good to you? It means that the people of Chovav end up inheriting the land of Yericho, which is super interesting, right? I didn't know about this extra group of people who were not Jewish who came in the conquering of Yehoshua and got a city of their own, and a very famous city at that. But that seems to be understood. And they lived there happily for however long. But then Eglon, the king of Moab, which we see here, right, he comes and he occupies Yericho, which is interestingly called Ir HaTimarim, right? Which of course, again, and Devorah sits under the Tamar tree. So, there's an interesting connection here. But this is shortly before our Haftarah picks up, right? That the people who are living in Yericho are sent out of Yericho. So this is Chovav's family, who we will understand is related to Chever, our friend that we'll get to in a second. And so the people of the Keni people, the Chovav's people, they return to the Negev, to the Judean desert, because they can't live in Yericho anymore, right? So they go south. But Chever, for whatever reason, and now we see here, right, in our parsha, that Chever, for whatever reason, decides to go north, not south. So far we've explained what his tent is doing in the war path of Sisera, right? And we meet him here. V'chever hakeni nifrad mikayin mibnei Chovav choten Moshe, right? So this is how we know he is a descendant of Chovav, who we have seen has come with us to Israel based on Moshe's request. But instead of being exiled from the Ir Tamarim and going south, he decides to go north to B'Tzananim Asher et Kadesh, right? He decides to pitch his tent at Alon B'Tzananim, which is near Kadesh. And there's an understanding then that what that means is that he had to strike up some kind of friendship with Yavin Melech Hatzor because he's all alone, right? If he lived with his tribal family in the south, then he would be safe. But since for whatever reason he chose to go north, there's a shalom. Ki shalom ben Yavin Melech Hatzor uven beit Chaver Hakeni. So now we understand both the where and the why of why Yael is able to entertain Sisra. It's not that
Excuse me, that is so cool. Thank you.
so cool, right? I'm so glad you appreciate it. This totally blew my mind. I learned this story many times, right? This is something I learned in either middle school or high school. And in fact, my daughter said, "Oh, I know this story." But certainly I always assumed Yael was Jewish. Right? But here it seems very clear that either she is married to a non-Jewish man or she is a part of this family that has always sort of woven in and out of our lives. So where is answered because for whatever reason we don't understand, Heber goes north. And the why is because Yael is actually not a tent of the enemy, as I assumed, until today, until yesterday, but because she is actually seen as a compatriot of the enemy, right? She's an ally of Sisra. And so when Sisra is feeling hot and tired, it's not that he just walks indiscriminately into any Jewish woman's tent. He sees his friend, Chever, and he says, "Oh, thank God, I'm so tired. I see a friendly face." And that's the why, right? So now we understand why Sisra ends up there. But now it makes what Yael does even more confusing, right? You wouldn't expect her to kill him. You would expect her to be like a good housewife and to feed him and send him on his way, renewed in his energies to overcome the Jews. But of course, there's like a little bit of a waffling there because Yael also belongs to a group of people who had at some point had an alliance with Bnei Israel, right? And I'm coming next Shabbat. I'm very excited, and I'll be speaking in Shul, and I think I'm going to speak about Yitro. I'm not exactly sure, but Yitro is an interesting character, and I think we see this echo in Chovav and in Chaver. Is he a part of our people? Is he a friend of our people? Is he not a friend of our people? It seems that they're wafflers, and I brought this very brief paragraph. Oops, sorry, this doesn't belong there / anywhere. This is when I thought I had time to teach two shiurim in 1 hour. And he says here that the story of Yael is the story of an individual who freely gives of herself and listens to the inner voice that calls upon her, I might say, to break out of the indifference that surrounds her and the lack of initiative implanted in man by his very nature and take action, right? So Yael is actually doing something unexpected, which I think is cool, right? And it places her a little bit more in Devorah's tent, right? She's doing something different than we would expect of her as a person, not necessarily as a woman. Sisera arrives at her tent on the clear assumption that it would serve as a safe haven, and this too teaches the extent to which Yael veered from the unexpected in the direction of personal daring. In this, she serves as a positive example of volunteerism and sacrifice and turns into the heroine of the story, which I think is a really cool idea. Rav Lichtenstein refers to Chaver Hakeni as Switzerland in a way that is not meant to be complimentary, right? That when you turn neutral, you often turn away from a lot of suffering and you don't do the right and moral thing. And so, right, maybe Yael's husband waffled. He was allied with Bnei Israel, but then when he moves north, he has to make an alliance with Yavin, and so he turns sides. But Yael seems to keep her moral compass in line, and of course, she kills him in this like very intense way with the tent peg, right? And she's able to do something that is decidedly, I would say, not feminine. Although I think we talked about Yudit. Did we talk about the story of Yudit here? I can't remember. But Yudit is another woman who impales a man with a tent peg to end the war, that time during the time of Hanukkah. And neither of them are Nevi'im or Neviot, right? But this idea that there are women who are able to sort of guide the storyline. I'm quite taken with the story of Ruth around Shavuos time. And I was surprised by how much Yael reminded me of Ruth at this moment, right? A woman who is not a part of the Jewish people, who does something unexpected, who allies herself with the Jewish people and really changes the narrative
Yes.
for many, many years.
And
Um,
you know,
so
sure on the other these spies stated, oh, yes.
oh, I missed it. What did you say?
Yes.
Were you talking fast, Tamar?
No, that's okay.
Oh, okay. Um, so I think that I think that Shirat Devorah is beautiful. And I wish that we had time to do both, but I'm glad that I didn't push it because I think we barely covered this in 45 minutes. But I think they're such interesting characters, and we can easily read back into Miriam and our week's parsha, forward into Ruth in a few short regalim cycles in Shavuos time, right? These characteristics of staying true to what we're supposed to do, of doing the right thing, right? I think keeping the lights on, lighting the candles in Poland or the Petilot in the Mikdash are things that give us that Hakol Lefi Ma'asav, that right, that the Ruach Elokim, the Ruach HaKodesh actually is equal opportunity, whether we are men or women, right? Jewish, non-Jewish, free or serving others. And I'm sure a million other differentials that we might not think make us eligible to be someone that the Ruach HaKodesh falls upon, but that there is certainly that space, which is very beautiful. And so I find the stories of Devorah and of Yael to be extraordinarily beautiful. Of course, this is the Haftarah, which was easy to find songs. I'm not going to play them now. You can just sort of click on this link. Devorah's song, this is a favorite of my daughter's. She learned it in school by Debbie Friedman, who wrote it for someone's bat mitzvah, a friend's bat mitzvah, which I think is really cool. And I put here such a different take on Devorah, right? A classical take, to say that like we can imagine the Shirat Devorah in so many different ways, right? It could be sort of this Debbie Friedman way, it could be a much more classical rendition, but they're both very beautiful. I encourage listening to both of them afterwards.
Were you going to tell us the history of your name?
Oh, thank you. So Yael, I was very shocked to discover this brave and bold woman in 6th grade. And I went home to my mother and I said, but they spelled her name wrong. And my mother laughed because her name is spelled traditionally, Yud Ayin Lamed. That is how most, I would venture, almost all Yaels spell their name in Hebrew. But my name is actually an acronym for my grandfather's name. My mother's father died when she was very young, and she and her 3 sisters decided to each name their individual firstborns after their father. So my oldest cousin is named Yisrael Aryeh Halevi, which is my grandfather's name, my Zaydi's name. And then there is Olivia, which is a female Aryeh, right? That was one renaming, and then an Ari. And so I am the last of the oldest children. My mother is the youngest of her sisters. And she wasn't sure what to name me. And so she and my father decided on Yud Aleph Lamed to stand for Yisrael Aryeh Halevi. So I spell my name incorrectly in Hebrew, to the frustration of many a Hebrew teacher in my life. But it turns out that my mother was not thinking of the story of Shoftim at all in inspiring me. Although I do think my Zaidi, of course, was someone who did the right thing and embodied many of the characteristics we've spoken about here, but I do not actually connect directly to Yael Keller January, Eshet Keller January.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you.
What did you say, Tamar?
I was thinking that I'm blocking on the name of the what?
The two Meraglim.
I'm blocking on the name of the woman who helped the Meraglim. She, I'm blocking, but anyhow.
Rahav.
Rachav. Thank you, Rabbi Schwartz.
Thank you. She too kind of fit the description that Moshe Lichtenstein gives of a person who listens to the inner voice, breaks out of the indifference, takes initiative and took action. It reminded me too of a woman who was not, of course, part of the Jewish people, but who helped.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that one, right? Because she also dramatically turns the storyline, right? I think in some ways it really shows, right? I can't remember. I'm not a student of history, but right, the person who got shot that started World War I, right? That this one sort of random occurrence.
Archduke Ferdinand.
Thank you. Right? I was quite taken with the idea of it, even if I was hazy on the details, that this one action would start an entire world war on some level, right? That Yael could, with her one brave action, steer us to, I think the Haftarah ends by saying there were 40 quiet years, which certainly Bnei Israel needed, right? That a whole generation grew up in peace because of Yael's action. Rachav certainly changes the storyline for the spies who come in, right? Assuring that they are safe and they're able to go back to report. And so it's very brave, and the bravery ripples out in so many amazing ways. That's beautiful. I love that, Rachav. I need to add her to my list of brave friends of Israel. Right. And we know that throughout our history, there are women and men like that who sort of step outside of their expectations or their societal norms to do these things and to
Like Theodore Herzl and Jabotinsky. That sort of came from the outside.
Hmm.
At least that's what my father and brother used to say.
Interesting. I'm not familiar enough with their histories, but that's cool. Right.
But he was Jewish. He was
Jewish. And I was
Yeah, of
gonna
course they were Jewish, but they sort of came from somewhat assimilated backgrounds.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, and Ruth, of course, I don't wish to take away from her conversion status. She is not non-Jewish at the end, right? She is a part of the Jewish people. She is merited to be the beginning of the story of Hamelech David.
Right.
So certainly not just non-Jews, but yes, Rachav is in some ways a much better example because she also, right? Yael doesn't expect to become a part of the Jewish people. Her love is not that strong as Ruth's. It's just a matter of doing the right thing at the right moment, which is kind of cool. Yeah, and Devorah is not a convert, but we don't know it. I mean, right? She's not defined by her father or her husband, so we don't know as much about her in that way. Cool. Well, I was very excited. I think.
Wow.
Thank you. It was.
I didn't get a chance to listen to your share all the way through because I usually have a chavruta on at 8:20. So I'm so glad to hear it.
What a compliment! I apologize to your chavruta, but I'm glad that.
2 or 3 real quick points, if I can make.
Yeah, please.
Number one, Reb Chaim Vital is probably the most important writer of Kabbalah, except from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, because he committed all the teachings of the Arizal to writing. They never got written down. 1. 2, I have one question though. I'm sure it's true what you're saying, but while we were talking, I went online to check. I thought there was a Rashi in Yitro that one of Yitro's names, as you said, was Ru'el. One is Kani. But also one of his names is Chovav, and you said that his son was Chovav.
Yes. So, okay. So, Rabbi Schwartz, we're on the same page because I also went to double check that when I was preparing because I thought that surely there was a mistake. Because here, right, you can even see that he's called Mibnei Chovav Chotein Moshe here, which does indicate that he would be a descendant of Yitro. But when you look in Bamidbar, it seems that there is some confusion because here Chovav is called Ben Reuel. And so I think as often is the case with, sometimes I think of Midrash as like fan fiction, right? Where they create this whole sort of complex network and web of people, and it doesn't always work out perfectly, right? So here, Ru'el and Chovav can't be the same person at this moment, right? This Chovav and Ru'el can't be the same person. But yes, I agree. Traditionally, we also think of Yitro as the name of Chovav. And I think he has one more name after that. Do you remember the last name offhand?
Kani, Ruel, Chovav. I just looked at the whole list in Rashi.
I looked this one.
Possibly also Hever. Yeter.
Yeter, thank you, Yeter. That's the last one I was thinking of. Right. So Yitro is a complicated character, also sort of like a Yael at times, but it seems like also sort of like a Chaver at times, right? Who goes to have shalom with King Yavin. And I think that we always know that sometimes our friendships and our alliances with people who are our friends and might even feel like part of our family at times, sometimes there's like a waffling. And so we rely on the Yaels of our narratives to pull us back in line, right? To support us at times when we need them. Amazing. Well, I hope you enjoy this week's Haftarah. I look forward to seeing you in person next Shabbat, but also on next Tuesday. This Thursday, it is Tu B'Shvat, and we are planning on doing some learning with Matuka Hechtman Feifel, who just made Aliyah this summer, she and her husband from Skokie Valley, and she's been doing a lot of farming, right? There's a large network of volunteer farmers in Israel right now to get all the farming done during this wartime. And so she's going to speak about her experience farming on Tu B'Shvat, and her experience being a new Olah during this tumultuous time on Thursday at noon on Zoom, and there'll be a link sent out.
She's Sherry's daughter-in-law, right?
Yes. And Rav Ari is teaching on Thursday night in the shul it will be, the tail end of Tu B'Shvat on the Zohar and Tu B'Shvat. So lots of cool things happening this week and next week. And I'm so glad you're all here. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's okay to you and everyone.
Yeah, here's your prayer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure. See you guys soon. Oops.